Alisa, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Jason. I'm excited to be here and I really appreciate the opportunity.
So, for those who aren't too familiar with you, why don't you give us a little bit of background on, kind of how you became, a divorce attorney and how you kind of got to this spot where you like to focus on collaborative divorce, which we'll talk about in a second.
Sure. So I started practicing law over 30 years ago, believe it or not, when things were very adversarial. The manner of practice was very adversarial. I came to become a family law attorney, I think, because my childhood really was very chaotic, and what my passion has been is trying to create situations for people where there's much less chaos. So I tried to steer myself away from family law and divorce law when I first started practicing, because I had so much experience in that with a turbulent family situation growing up. But naturally, through my natural nature, I think, of being a compassionate person and a listener and really wanting to help people in the field of law, family law just became where I naturally ended up every time. And I was really good at it. So in the different areas of law that I was practicing, which included some employment law and some immigration law, where my practice grew the most and the fastest was in the family law area. So at some point I had to embrace that. And really through my journey, if you had asked me 10 years ago if I could tell you why I ended up in family law, I don't think I would have been able to. But in this journey and founding my law firm, Transitions Legal, I really did a lot of soul searching into what my values are and what's important to me. And that really brought me to realize that it really is where I came from as a child and my family experiences, and how in what I do in the way that I practice family law, I really am helping people move and transition from one stage of life to another, and trying to reduce the chaos that's involved in every divorce situation.
Yeah, isn't it so funny to me that how our personal experiences growing up and our family dynamic really really does like imprint on us like how we feel and kind of how we gravitate towards what we do in life. I'm the same way. My family upbringing probably could have been better. I always say, and I feel somewhat confident saying this because I don't think my parents really listen to this, but
Oh no.
no, I love them both. They're still married. They're married. This year is gonna be 50 years. Okay,
It's great.
50 years. Um, that's huge. But I always kid. They probably shouldn't be married for 50 years. you know, but they make it work. But it was just one of those situations where I think a lot of people can appreciate, the dysfunctionality of it all. But and how that really just imprints on us. Like that's probably what drives me to, uh, you know, lean towards being a mediator when I see conflict. Right, I just try to make it work out. That's my natural instinct. And that's probably why I got into family law when I went to law school to begin with too.
Right. And I will say, like you said, that your parents are married for 50 years and maybe they shouldn't have been, but these are different times that we live in now than when our parents were married. And my father passed away when I was very young, which led to my mother having a number of marriages, which is where the divorces came in, because the number of marriages means a number of divorces.
Right.
But the way that I look at it, because now I'm divorced, and I was divorced 8 years ago. I was married for 25 years, and I do look at that as a success.
Absolutely.
We're not all meant to be with the same person forever, and just because we get divorced, it doesn't mean that it wasn't a successful marriage. So I do like to think that that being married for 25 years was a success. And the other way to look at it is people didn't, when we used to, in the old, many years ago, people said married forever, you choose one partner for life. Well, if you think about it, life didn't last as long when that became the staple in our society. So divorce is also kind of a virtual death in a way, because it's the end. The marriage has lived its life, so to speak, and it ends. We live much longer, so if we're not staying as married as long, that it makes sense.
Yeah, the life expectancy, I don't know the statistics, but I do know like life expectancy has increased um, pretty well, in recent years.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, and the idea is you're supposed to grow together as a married couple, but sometimes that's hard, and sometimes there are events that are unforeseen and change, that whole dynamic, and it, nobody knows what life has planned for them, no matter how hard you try to plan, and
Right.
so you just, right, some work
Right.
out, and that's great, and some don't, and that's fine too. As long as both people are amicable about it and move on to hopefully bigger and better things, then that's fine.
Yes.
Um, so how did you get involved in collaborative divorce? Let's explain first of all what collaborative divorce is for those who aren't familiar with it.
Okay. Collaborative divorce is an alternative process, and I also like to think of it as a movement, the collaborative movement. It's a process to get divorced that does not involve the court system. You make all of your decisions being guided and educated and informed with collaboratively trained professionals. That would include attorneys, mental health professionals, and financial specialists. And they help guide you and help you make your decisions that will help you to resolve all of the issues that are involved in a divorce, whether it's property or child related.
And when we say alternative, let's break that even down further for everybody, because as attorneys we're familiar with all these different words and stuff, but other people might not be. And the word litigation is thrown around so much, and a lot of times I even find people are not exactly clear on what litigation itself means. So let's clear that up too. Litigation is when you go to court, right?
Yes.
You're resolving your disputes in court and with the judge because you can't agree. So that's what we call litigation, and that's the standard, I guess, the old school standard way of doing it.
Right. Ultimately the judge can be the person to make the decisions.
Right. And I always say that's really the last place you want to be, on no matter what side you represent, because judges are people too, and they have their biases, and whether it's conscious or subconscious, and you really don't want to leave your life to be decided by one person, if possible. Sometimes you don't have a choice, but that's the idea. So litigation is, would you say, the least efficient, meaning it takes the longest and the most expensive method to get divorced?
Yes, and it's also emotionally expensive. So
absolutely.
It's expensive in time, in emotions, and in finances. All three of those.
Because I always tell people the wheels of justice turn very slowly.
Yes, they do.
And people don't understand, well, what takes so long with the courts? Well, I don't understand what's taking so long. And it's just, I don't know about Michigan, but I know New Jersey, it's just a backlog of cases, and you have one judge, only so many judges, and there's just too much to do. And it's just the nature of the beast. Is that how it kind of is in Michigan there?
Yeah, so in Michigan, it is the same. What people don't understand, what our clients don't understand, is how many cases each judge is assigned. And we're broken down into different counties, as I know it is also in New Jersey.
Right.
in New York. It's so some counties are smaller and have fewer cases, but they still experience backlogs because then they'll have fewer judges to handle those
Right.
cases. And there are many steps to a divorce. So the judges are juggling their time schedules and the people who are able to settle and the people who have to go to trial. And trial is never fast and never quick. But in Michigan, the Supreme Court in Michigan has issued guidelines for our courts that require within the legal system to complete a divorce with children within a year. So I do tell people that you can anticipate that your divorce will take somewhere between 6 months and a year to complete. And I think that's fast. You can ask anybody in employment law or business law that's litigating a case. For a case to be done within a year is really fast in law, in terms of law, don't you think?
Oh yeah, think about your typical personal injury, case like an automobile accident takes at least 2 years here, often more, to go through the system. And New Jersey also has the same guidelines. We call it like best practices. You're supposed to try to complete your divorce through the courts within 1 year. Rarely happens. Unless everything works almost flawlessly and everybody's on the same page and wants to get it done quickly and works together. Otherwise, forget about it. It just never happens. And then in the event you have to go to a trial, it's not like a jury trial where you'll have 2-3 consecutive days of the trial and then you're done.
No.
You have 1 day of trial and then you could have your next day 2 months later.
Yes.
Is that how it works there too?
Absolutely. And I have a case right now that the parties have a prenuptial agreement, which is an agreement that a couple might enter into prior to getting married to try to determine how, if things don't work out, property will be distributed. Well, we're having an evidentiary hearing with regard to the validity of the prenuptial agreement. And in the meantime, we're still trying to settle the case, not able to settle. So I know that down the line, we're also going to be having a trial on this case. Well, the first hearing about the prenuptial agreement was in February, before the pandemic lockdown. So that was in February. We only had a half day.
Right.
6 months later, in 2 weeks, the evidentiary hearing will continue. But that's just an evidentiary hearing with regard to the validity of a document. We haven't even begun the trial stage of it, which will be several months more down the line.
Yeah.
So it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And speaking of the pandemic, I do have to say that being able to be involved in a process like the collaborative process that is outside of the court, our collaborative cases are moving forward without stopping. I've been doing cases on Zoom for collaborative even prior to the pandemic. So these cases are continuing. They're continuing to go along smoothly, the same thing. So it's an advantage to the collaborative process, and those people who were involved in the collaborative process prior to the pandemic really didn't feel the effect like my litigation clients have felt the effect.
Right, because you're not dependent on the court being open and their scheduling. So kind of circling back, so the collaborative process and the collaborative method of getting divorced is what we call, and you'll hear it often, an alternative. It's alternative dispute resolution is the key word, but it's an alternative to litigation. So litigation is not the only way to get divorced. In fact, we're talking about this other method called collaborative divorce. So collaborative divorce still involves attorneys, right? Each party has an attorney. Now, are these attorneys, do they have to be specially trained to do this collaborative method, or can anybody just do it?
They have to be specially trained. They have to take the basic training that's offered through the International Association of Collaborative Professionals, the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals. You'll hear me refer to it as IACP. and I can send you that a link to that information if we can include it in the
Absolutely.
show details. So the attorneys, as well as the mental health professionals and the financial neutral, are all going to be specially trained in the collaborative process, because it is a specific process to resolution, to divorce resolution.
And what is why do they have it set up like that you have to be trained in this? What is I guess for lack of a better word, the mantra behind doing a divorce collaboratively, which, the basic definition means working together, right? So what's the mindset that they want attorneys and professionals engaged in the process to be trained in this method versus just anybody doing it?
So that's an excellent question, because a lot of attorneys feel, well, I work collaboratively with the other attorney, so what do I need the special training for? And within the special training, what you're getting is it's a change in your mindset. As a litigator without special training, I might work collaboratively with my co-counsel, but I have the mindset that if I can't work it out, I can always resort to going to court. That's not a problem. If you're trained collaboratively, you're trying to make, it's what we call a paradigm shift in your mindset. Court is absolutely not an option. Your methods of trying to get to resolution and your mindset and your investment in the process is different, and there's a different way of thinking. So we're not adversarial, and that's when we go to law school, we are trained to be adversarial and to win for our client. In the collaborative process, what my mindset is when I am representing my client is to make sure that my client understands that there are just several options, several reasonable and realistic options in how we can get a matter settled and how we can distribute the property. There's never just one way.
Right.
As a litigator, I know that there's not just one way, but I want to win for my client. I want the biggest win possible. When I'm working as a collaborative attorney, I'm trying to make sure that there's a win-win solution so that both sides are satisfied, both sides are winning, both sides' needs are being met. And that because my client and the other spouse are intimately involved in all of the decision making, they're going to leave the process feeling much more satisfied.
Absolutely. It really is a mindset shift there, because as attorneys, if you're a litigator and you're used to litigating and going to court, right, it's a competition every time, right? You file a motion and you want to win, and you're arguing your position against the other position. And litigators who have been doing it for a long time, it gets ingrained in you. And so, it's not so easy just to take that hat off and try to work in a different atmosphere, where the emphasis is not on winning, but working together.
Yes.
Right. And so attorneys, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but in order to engage in a collaborative divorce, the parties and all the professionals involved have to agree, and actually you sign a document, sort of like a contract, right?
Yes.
To do it this way, work together and not go to court.
Yes, we sign what's called a participation agreement. And here's another thing. I'm a Michigan attorney. You're in New Jersey. People listening to your show are from all over the country. The collaborative process, the way that we're trained, we're all trained the same way, and we all use the same or a similar collaborative participation agreement. So what I'm saying today as a Michigan, licensed in Michigan, although I am licensed in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. I've just put those licenses on hold since I now live in Michigan.
Right.
But when I started out, I was there. But in any case, what I'm saying in terms of the collaborative divorce process, even though I practice in Michigan, it's going to apply in all of our states and beyond our states internationally. That's why there's an international academy, and we're all connected in that way. And it's actually amazing to be able to sit on a call with people in Japan and in Israel and in China and in the UK and talk about a process that as attorneys or professionals we're all committed to, and we all are speaking the same language. So
Yeah. And you're all, the idea is to be invested in a positive outcome for everybody involved, right?
right.
And that's the difference. Some divorces where it's really hotly contested, and you just have two people butting heads and trying to, either hurt the other side or inflict as much, emotional and financial damage. They hire a bulldog attorney, and that's their mindset too. This is a totally different approach to getting divorced. So, you know, it's a lot. You work outside the court system, right?
Correct.
So,
and the participation agreement that you asked me about before, it's the participation agreement that is a contract. It's a legal contract that you as the husband or the wife are entering into along with the other professionals, and it's guiding your conduct. It's guiding your agreement to full disclosure. It guides the process, and it keeps people invested, because it also says what one really important part about the collaborative process, it keeps us as attorneys invested, is that once I sign the collaborative participation agreement, as your attorney, I cannot represent you in an adversarial proceeding in court. So if
right.
the collaborative process is not successful, you have to find a new attorney to start all over again and represent you in the court process.
And so what does that mean when you say start all over again? That means the person has to hire a new attorney, retain that new attorney for an original retainer fee. That new attorney has to get up to speed, and it's just more expensive, a lot more expensive for the client. And from a time perspective, you're starting from scratch with the court. And like we just said a few minutes ago, court takes a long time, even when we're not in a pandemic.
Yes.
And so that's the client's incentive to stay invested in the process. And of course, the attorney's investment is they want to continue representing and come to a positive final outcome. So the client's happy and everybody's happy, right? Because happy clients refer other clients.
Right. And those of us who are committed to the collaborative process, I feel that we really do care about our clients. I know I care about the outcome, and I care that my client has a positive experience. So I want the process to work for my client, because I know that after they get through this difficult time in their lives, there's a whole life after divorce where they're going to be co-parenting. They don't want to carry baggage from the divorce or resentment from the divorce process, especially if they are co-parenting. And they will have worked out so many agreements that they can take with them after their divorce is final, and they're in that new phase of co-parenting, or that new phase of being single and just having new experiences and new adventures.
Right. And we mentioned before, different people that are involved in this collaborative process. Obviously, each side will have its own attorney representing them, who are trained and invested in the collaborative process. But you also have other professionals, and those may differ case to case. But how does that work as far as, experts go? If you need a finance expert, do both sides share the cost of that?
Yes. So collaborative divorce is not only outside the courtroom, in what I like to call it in the conference room divorce, it also involves a team. So the 3 T's to the collaborative divorce process are a team, transparency, and trust. And the team involves the 2 attorneys along with a mental health professional and a financial neutral. So the way that I like to have my clients proceed in the collaborative process is with a full team in place. So the members I just described makes it a full team. And we found that having a full team, it really really is true to the intention of the process and in how you're going to save the most money, because you have a mental health professional who's focusing on and whose specialty are the emotional needs of the parties going through the divorce. And since we know that most divorces are, I'd say 80% emotional, having a mental health professional who's working with the parties and who's part of your team and can talk to a client who's maybe having a difficult time because they don't want the divorce, but they have to move through it. They have somebody who's built into the process who's going to help them with that.
But okay.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt, but with the mental health professional aspect of it, how does that work? And this applies to, I guess, the finance guy too. They are working for both parties.
Correct. They're neutrals.
They're neutrals. So there's no real confidentiality going on, right? But for the mental health professional, because usually in a therapy environment, it's absolutely confidential. But how will a collaborative mental health professional work with the parties if one of them is having sort of a crisis or needs some talking to?
So, good question. The participation agreement itself says that the process itself and the things that we all talk about they are confidential in terms of their every discussion is really part of a settlement negotiation. So you're not going to be able to necessarily take what you learn and what you say in those settlement negotiations into court if your process isn't successful. So that's one way. The other way is we have to differentiate between the work that the mental health professional in the collaborative team is doing with husband and wife or mother and father, the work that mental health professional is doing with the couple within the process is very different than therapy. It's not therapy at all.
Right.
And that's why the confidentiality can be different, because they're not sharing the same things. And one of the foundations of the collaborative process is that transparency and disclosing all information that is relevant to the case. And I have a good example of something that in therapy you might consider to be confidential, but once you step into the collaborative process, you have to question whether or not you should keep it confidential, and that's the issue of an affair. So if a couple have come into the collaborative process for the divorce, and one of the spouses has been having an affair, but it's not disclosed, and the other, let's say that a wife has been having an affair and husband doesn't know about it, but now wife's attorney knows about it, and the mental health professional knows about it. So we have to ask ourselves, is it relevant to the process? That does this information need to be disclosed? And I like to talk about this as an example because I had a really hard time when I first started practicing collaborative law, understanding why I had to disclose if my client was having an affair, because I often used to think that it's just going to hurt the other party, or let's say the affair is over, it's not happening anymore, and I had a hard time grasping why it was important to disclose.
Right, it's not relevant, really.
You think it's not relevant, but having gone through it a couple of times with different clients and working with my collaborative colleagues, it is so relevant because for a number of reasons. Number one, if it comes out at a later point in time that a spouse had an affair or was having an affair during the process, the spouse who was not having the affair, who learns about it after everything is done, thinks, what else don't I know? the
Right.
trust that is one of the foundations of the collaborative process is gone. The trust in the process, the trust in the professionals who are helping, and obviously the trust in that spouse. If my spouse didn't tell me that there was an affair, what else don't I know? So that's one area. The other area is that it carries so much emotional. It's so emotionally charged that when it comes out, if it's after the process is over, you can question, how motivated was I, if you're the person who was having the affair, how motivated was I to make decisions because I didn't want my spouse to find out? So it's even driving the person who wants to keep it secret. It's even driving that person emotionally, and in their decision-making process, you might not know it until a few years later. So it does become relevant to the process in really nuanced kind of ways sometimes, because you wouldn't think about it. And it took me a while to really get to that point.
Yeah, right. It is kind of a
Understand it.
little, yeah, no, it is kind of a, it's one of those things that it's so emotionally charged. On the one hand, you're like, oh man, if this comes out, it's just going to unravel everything and set us back. But on the other hand, right, you want to, from a good faith effort, just throw it all out there so everybody at least feels like the process had some integrity to it.
And if you do it within, the process is set up so we can help you handle that disclosure.
The mental health expert, right?
The mental health, but even your attorneys are going to help. The whole team is going to support the couple going through the process in dealing with this situation. So
Yeah.
It's built-in support that you're not going to have once the process is over. We've had cases, not just affairs, but even like, somebody had an affair and the person they had the affair with was pregnant during the process. And so you can imagine what that was like to deal with in the collaborative process. But you know what? It worked. It really worked. And that's why the collaborative model that we use with the support and the team and the full disclosure is so important. By the end, there was a great co-parenting agreement between the husband and the wife. The resentment that you would anticipate if you learned about it afterward, or were in the court-based process, the wife did not have that resentment and animosity, and they were a new family, right? It was a much larger extended family to include this new woman and that child.
Yeah, no, having that team of professionals supporting you is so important when you're going through any adversity, really. And so that, yeah, I absolutely agree. That's one of the understated benefits of going through a collaborative divorce, is that you have support from really everybody, not just your attorney. And that helps you get through the bumps in the road. Let me ask you this, and running out of time, but I want to cover it because, every divorce has, or say most divorces, have their bumps in the road. And it's not all kumbaya, right? All the time.
It is not kumbaya, no.
Even in collaborative. Not. But so when adversity presents itself and you have, let's say, we'll call it a differing of opinions on an issue, whether it's alimony or parenting time, custody, whatever it is. And even the lawyers have, different opinions because they are representing your clients.
Yes.
How do you handle that? How do you handle adversity in the collaborative process?
So it's not easy, and that's why I say people think, oh, collaborative is so much easier. It's really not easier, because when a conflict or when we're at a standstill because the parties are at completely different have completely different perspectives, and it's at an impasse. We have to sit. It's very uncomfortable, right? Think about sitting in a room with somebody where there's all that conflict, and think about how uncomfortable it is. And the training that we talked about in the beginning, there's basic training that we do to become trained in the collaborative model, but there's advanced training that we continue to do as collaborative professionals throughout our career to continue to work on our mindset and how to deal with conflict. And one of the things I learned at one of the conferences I went to was that if you sit with the discomfort in the room, you come up with much more creative solutions. It's amazing how our brains work and how sitting with discomfort leads to creativity. There's a woman, her name is Pauline Tesler. She's one of the 4 mothers of the collaborative process, and she said something that I really think is so true. She said that collaborative practice liberates the problem solver within. And I have found that so to be true, because we really have to get creative in finding a solution. And that's what we do. We sit with the discomfort, we acknowledge it, we do a lot of hard work. And as professionals, to maintain our professional relationship, we do a lot of work behind the scenes. We do a lot of networking. We're constantly talking to each other, just so that we are colleagues in the true sense, where we can respect each other's opinions, even if they're different. And what we're all committed to as professionals is the process. We're all committed to the process. And we know that this model for helping people get through their divorce really does work in having people who are happier and kinder and more respectful at the end of the process, and then continuing in their after divorce life.
Yeah, and it all goes back to, I think, what we kind of alluded to earlier. There's more than one way to skin a cat, but sometimes, people have tunnel vision, and get set in a, it has to be like this, or this is what I want, I'm not like, that's the way it has to be,
right.
But that's not true, and
right.
and that, going back to the contract to do the collaborative process, right? That it forces everybody to kind of sit with the discomfort, because it's not so easy just to say, oh, okay, we'll let the judge decide, or I'll follow a motion, right? Because you're going to throw it all away, and nobody wants that. So it forces you to, right.
Yeah, and it's what we try to help our clients see is that there's a range of reasonable outcomes. We know as attorneys, we could be arguing for a settlement to go one way, or the settlement, if we represent the other spouse, to go a different way. There's never just one way to make things work. And I would say that, in terms of people, digging their heels in a position, that is very common for even our clients, our collaborative clients. And so the work that we often do as attorneys and professionals is helping them to open their minds to be able to see the options, and that there are other ways that something can be solved, and honing in on what is most important to you. So I can find out from my client what's most important to you, and what would you give up, because that one thing, maybe your business interest, is so important. And if you weigh that against your premarital interest in a retirement account, which one really hits you in the gut,
Right.
and which one do you want to preserve? And that usually helps gets people thinking of alternatives from where they might have been stuck before.
And one exercise I use with my coaching with people too, when, talking about any type of negotiation, really, whether it's in mediation or anywhere, is, wants versus needs.
Yes.
Right. I always say, make a list and 2 columns. This is what I want, but this is what I need. And then you'll see the differences, and it helps to kind of focus your minds on what's really important for you. and then you could use that when you negotiate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Wow. This is great stuff. I hope that we really kind of have given everybody a really good, broad, detailed picture of what collaborative divorce, is like, and how it truly is an alternative to litigation, and a much what I would consider a much favorable alternative. It's quicker. Most of the time, it's cheaper, and there's no reason not to do it. But everybody has to want to do it too.
Right. That's one thing. Both sides have to agree to the process. You can't really force somebody into the process.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know about it. So I really appreciate being able to talk about it and educate people as much as possible, because I think it's definitely a more holistic and a more humane way to end your marriage. And I can't think of any reason not to end your marriage through the collaborative process. There's really not. If you can do it and your spouse agrees to it, get on this bandwagon.
Well, that's it. And you have to have your mind right to a point to even agree to do it. If you're emotionally charged and full of anger, and it might take a little work, but the idea is that you should see the benefits of it, for you and everybody involved. So I think it's the way to go if you can do it, and I love the process myself. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I thought this was great.
Thank you for having me.
Tell everybody where they can find you.
They can find me in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. The name of my law firm is Transitions Legal. I have a website, transitionslegal.com, and they can find out a lot more information, not only about collaborative, but about my practice and where my passions lie, about the different ways that you can go through your divorce, whether you live in Michigan or you live anywhere else in the world. The information that you can find on my website, transitionslegal.com, really is going to be a good basis for information for you.
Absolutely, and we'll have those links on the show notes to this episode. So, what a great conversation! Thank you so much again for being my guest, and we'll have to talk again in the future and do.
Thank you. I look forward to it.